Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Beckwith. Welcome to Flashback Friday. This Friday we are going to look at lunar phases. Alright, so moon phases and lunar phases you guys have been studying for a long time, but some of you are still struggling a little bit remembering and understanding why we see what we see. So the first thing we're going to do is take a look at a three-dimensional model that will hopefully help refresh your memory and give you a little bit more review on exactly why we see what we see during the different lunar phases. So we're once again using Tinkercad to show our three-dimensional model of how the Earth and the Moon and the Sun interact with one another to show us the various phases of the Moon from our perspective here on Earth. So I'm starting out way out here in space. I'm actually flying high above the North Pole, and I wanted to start in this position just as a reminder that at all times, with the exception of a lunar eclipse, we are on Earth, always half of the Earth is lit up by the sun, and half of the moon is always lit up by the sun. And so we've illustrated that on our moons with the light half here with the white and then the dark half here with the black. So even though we see different parts of the moon lit up, at all times half of the moon is always lit up. So the question then becomes, well then why do we see what we see? And it has to do with our perspective on the Earth. So if I zoom in here to the Earth's perspective, and I'm actually going to delete the Earth so that we can have a good viewpoint. So now I'm in the perspective of the Earth, all right, looking at the sun. Well, when I look at the new moon, I only see the dark half of the moon. So I don't see the lit up half because of my perspective. And then as time goes on, I now see my waxing crescent, and then I see first quarter, and then I see the waxing gibbous, and then I see the full moon. But in all of those phases, half of the moon is still always lit up. I only see the sections that I see though because of my perspective here on the Earth. And then continuing to the waning gibbous, and then third quarter, and then waning crescent, and all the way back to new moon. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind. The first thing is the first half of the lunar cycle, we call it the waxing half. So starting at new moon, going all the way around until we get to full moon, that's the waxing half of the cycle. And from that perspective, the light will always be on the right-hand side from our perspective. And from the new moon all the way to the full moon, the amount that we see each night is increasing. So that's why we call it waxing. Conversely, from the full moon back around to the new moon, on the second half of the cycle, we call it waning because we see less and less every night. And in the waning phase, the light is on the left-hand side from our perspective. So let's take another look from the Earth's perspective. So we have the waxing on the right, all the way to full moon, and then the waning on the left, all the way back to new moon. So, once again, waxing on the right, and waning on the left. The other thing to keep in mind is that from first quarter all the way through third quarter, we are seeing from the half of the moon that we can actually visibly see, we're seeing more than half of that half, so more than a quarter, we're seeing it lit up. And so from first quarter to third quarter, we see more than a quarter. From third quarter back around to first quarter, we see less than a quarter. All right, so from this half, from third quarter to first quarter, we're seeing less than a quarter of the lit up moon. And from first quarter to third quarter, we're seeing more than a quarter. And that's kind of a weird way to think about it. But the other thing to keep in mind is that this cycle is full of different patterns. For example, the length of a cycle is about 28 days, which means from new moon to first quarter is about a week, and from first quarter to full moon is another week, and from first quarter to third quarter is another week, and from third quarter back to full moon is another week. So hopefully our three-dimensional model helps jog your memory a bit on why we see what we see based upon our perspective on the Earth. So hopefully that review was helpful and refreshed your memory on some things. I also want to go over a little bit different way to think about this that may help some of you where the three-dimensional modeling is still a little bit confusing. And it's a little bit more two-dimensional in nature, so it's not as accurate as the 3D model, but it could help you to understand the interaction between the Earth, the Sun, and the Moon a little bit more, to give us our different perspective on the different phases. And for that, we're actually going to use angles for triangles. So let's take a look. So another way to think about the interactions between the Earth, the Sun, and the Moon, and the lunar phases is to think about it in terms of the angles where each of these celestial bodies represents a point in a triangle. So if we think about the Earth and the Sun and the Moon during the new moon phase, which we wouldn't actually be able to see, but for the sake of this, let's make it so we can see the moon, you would see that they line up into a 180-degree line. This is also true for full moon. However, for first quarter and third quarter, if we were to make a triangle, the Earth, the Sun, and the Moon would make a 90-degree angle from the perspective of the Earth. So if we focus specifically on the angle that is made here on the Earth from our perspective, which really is what gives us the different appearances of the moon during the phases, our perspective. If we were to think of it in those terms, then at 90 degrees, we're at first quarter. And as the moon moves from the new moon position through the waxing crescent to first quarter, the angle from here on the Earth would be between 1 and 89 degrees, depending on the specific day and time. This is also true for waning crescent, going from waning crescent to new moon. Third quarter at 90 degrees, and then as the moon continues to orbit, the angle changes just as it did for its mirror image, the waxing crescent. The difference is just which side of the light is visible for us. Remember, for waxing crescent, the light is on the right. For waning crescent, the light is on the left. And then this is also true for each of the gibbous phases. So again, the full moon is 180 degrees because it basically makes a line between the three. But at each of the gibbous phases, we're between 91 and 179 degrees, depending on where in the orbit it is, from either first quarter to full moon, or from full moon to third quarter. Again, the only difference is which side the light is on. So learners, I hope that was helpful for you. I hope that you hopefully got a good refresher on that. I know it's been quite a while since we've talked about lunar phases, but hopefully going through that review and also thinking about it in terms of angles for triangles hopefully gave you a little bit better perspective, no pun intended, on lunar phases.